By the time the gavel fell at the county auction, everyone in the room knew exactly who the fool was. The haunted Miller place had been passed over for years, its 180 acres of frozen timberland and one rotting cabin sitting at $500, until a quiet, broad-shouldered veteran with a limp raised his hand once and ended the silence. Marcus Hale didn't flinch when the clerk hesitated reading the address. He'd heard "cursed," "bad ground," and "people don't stay there long," whispered behind him. After 3 tours and 2 blown convoys, superstition felt like a luxury. Cheap land was all he could afford, and solitude was all he wanted. Only his dog seemed to disagree. Shadow, a 7-year-old sable German shepherd with a faint white scar across his nose, refused to settle the moment they crossed the tree line that night. While the blizzard swallowed the last glow of town, Shadow paced in the truck bed, nails clicking, eyes fixed on the dark smear of cabin ahead like he already smelt something human. Noses weren't meant to recognize. Inside, the air felt wrong. Too heavy, too still. A flannel jacket waited on a hook. Boots stood by the door. On the table, a ceramic mug sat in a perfect ring of dust, as if the hand that set it down had never returned. Marcus told himself it was just abandoned property. Shadow didn't buy it. The dog skirted every room without a sound, then froze over one oddly patched corner of floor where the boards ran against the grain and deep gouges cut across the wood, half hidden under a cheap rug. His claws dug in. His throat rumbled once. Whatever was under that floor had scared the last owner so badly he'd rather disappear than open it again. The Flathead County Courthouse smelt of stale coffee and wet wool. Fluorescent lights buzzed above rows of plastic chairs where ranchers, loggers, and tired clerks pretended not to stare at the stranger in the back row. Ryan Caldwell sat with his cap folded between his hands. Faded denim shirt still dusted with road salt. Quiet blue eyes taking in every exit, every badge, every nervous glance. At 58, with a salt and pepper crew cut and a face mapped by sand, sun, and shrapnel from Fallujah, he looked like a man who had already survived anything a room like this could throw at him. The auction clerk droned through C's trailers, storage sheds, and vacant lots in a flat voice. Every property drew at least one bid, sometimes 3, the gavel tapping a lazy rhythm. Then she picked up the next file, paused just a fraction too long, and checked the page twice before speaking. 180-acre agricultural and timber parcel, former Miller Ranch, including residence structure. Opening bid, $500. The sound in the room dropped an octave. A man in a seed company cap stopped mid-joke. Someone cleared his throat too loudly and then seemed embarrassed by the echo. Near the wall, an older rancher muttered, "Should have pulled that one," and the woman beside him stared hard at the floor. Even the young deputy leaning against the back wall straightened, eyes scanning faces the way a man watches for a storm he knows is coming. The clerk tried again. $500. Do I have a bid? Silence thickened. Men who had been waving paddles 5 minutes earlier suddenly found their phones fascinating. Calloused hands twisted hat brims. Nobody looked at the map on the screen showing a stretch of timber, a thin blue line of creek, and a small black square labeled dwelling. The parcel might as well have been a body on the table. On the sheet in Ryan's lap, that same black square marked the only piece of ground in 3 counties his disability check and dwindling savings could touch. 180 acres, rough but real. A roof, even if it leaked, he could fix with his own hands. After years of desert sand, hospital ceilings, and motel rooms that never felt like anywhere, he wanted trees, hard work, and days when the loudest sound was his own axe. He raised his hand. The clerk actually flinched. Her gaze snapped to his bidder number. We have 500, she said too quickly. Any other bids? She swept the room with hopeful eyes. No one moved. Chairs creaked. Snow hissed faintly against the high windows. Sold to bidder 38, she announced, bringing the gavel down harder than she needed to. Whispers slithered around Ryan before his arm even dropped. Out-of-towner? Doesn't know. Let him find out. The words threaded together, thin and sharp. He had heard that same tone in briefing tents whenever a road known for IEDs appeared on the map. Nobody wanted to say no out loud, so they hid their fear behind bad jokes and silence. At the front, a young deputy peeled off from the wall and waited by the clerk's table with a manila envelope. The badge on his chest read, Riley. The freckles across his nose said he should have been in a college library instead of wearing a gun. "Sign here, Mr. Caldwell," he said, sliding the paperwork over. "Congrats on your new ranch." Ryan signed with a steady, practiced hand. "From the way everybody reacted," he said, "it doesn't sound much like congratulations." Riley lowered his voice. "You really don't know about that parcel?" "I know it's paid off, and it has a roof," Ryan replied. "That place used to belong to a journalist," Riley said. "Nathan Brooks. Wrote for the local paper, smart, stubborn. In 2007, he started a series on Black Ridge mining. Said they were dumping tailings into the valley's drinking water, poisoning wells and paying for fake tests. He came in here one afternoon, same as you, grabbed supplies and said he was headed up to the Miller place to finish his notes." The deputy's jaw tightened. That was the last day anyone saw him alive. Ryan's fingers paused on the edge of the envelope. "They find a body?" "The truck showed up abandoned near the gate," Riley answered. "Driver's door open, keys gone, notebook missing. State police searched the hills, we dragged the creek, and we checked bus stations, airports, and the whole routine. The official report says he cracked under pressure and ran. Unofficial, most folks think he poked the wrong bear. Easier to call the ranch cursed than admit somebody made sure he never came back down." Ryan folded the deed and slid it into the pocket of his faded shirt, over the familiar weight in his chest that never quite went away. "Buildings don't make men vanish," he said quietly. "People do." The deputy studied him, a scar tracing from temple to jaw. The way he carried his shoulders like incoming fire was always a possibility. "Are you heading up there alone?" Riley asked. "I've got my dog," Ryan said. "Raven, 9-year-old all-black shepherd, silver muzzle. Smarter than most people I know." "Good," Riley murmured. His gaze flicked toward the glass doors. "Out past those trees. A dog will tell you the truth before any neighbor will. If something up there feels wrong, listen to him." Outside, the cold hit like a slap. Wind knifed across the parking lot, driving tiny needles of ice into exposed skin. The sky over Flathead County had gone the color of gunmetal, clouds sagging low over the mountains like a lid. Ryan's battered pickup waited near the far curb, paint scoured dull by too many winters. Behind the fogged windscreen, a German shepherd sat upright in the passenger seat, its silhouette sharp against the dim light. When Ryan opened the door and climbed in, the dog leaned forward to sniff the envelope tucked under his arm. All black except for the silver dusting his muzzle, Raven's amber eyes locked onto Ryan's face with the same unwavering focus that had once found buried explosives in foreign sand. "We just bought the only piece of ground nobody else wanted," Ryan said. $500 for the famous cursed ranch. Hell of a bargain, huh, Raven?" The dog huffed once and turned his head toward the distant tree line, ears pricked as if the wind carried a scent only he could read. On the way out of town, Ryan swung into the only general store still open. A squat wooden building with a crooked ice chest out front and a bell over the door that screamed when he pushed it. Inside, the air smelt of dust, jerky, and wood smoke. Shelves sagged under canned food, propane, and faded hunting caps. Behind the counter, a woman with braided white hair and a red flannel shirt watched a tiny television showing the storm sliding across the map. "Afternoon," Ryan said, grabbing coffee, beans, bread, and a big bag of dog food. "Looks like it's coming in fast." Her eyes flicked from the weather report to his face, then to the envelope in his hand. The name tag on her chest read Joe. "Fast enough," she said. "You're the one who just took Miller Ranch?" "Seems that way," he answered, setting his supplies down. "Seemed that way with the last one, too," Joe muttered. She started ringing items, the scanner beeping slowly. "Nathan Brooks stood right where you're standing. Talked my ear off about poisoned wells and mining records and how he was finally close to proving something. Drove up that road one night and never came back. They dragged the lake, checked bus depots, and told his mama he probably ran off. But this valley's not that big. People don't just evaporate." "You think the land did it?" Ryan asked. Joe shook her head, braids brushing her shoulders. "Land remembers," she said. "It keeps whatever people bury in it. That place doesn't belong to the living anymore." Her gaze shifted past him to the window, where Raven's dark shape filled the passenger side of the truck, nose fogging the glass. "The only reason I'm saying anything is because of that dog. Animals know when ground is wrong long before we do." "Maybe it's time somebody asked the ground what it's been holding on to," Ryan said. Joe hesitated, then slipped a box of matches into the bag without ringing it up. "Road drifts shut fast once that snow starts," she warned. "If you get up there and it feels like the walls are listening, you turn around. Some stories don't want an audience." Ryan paid in worn bills and gave a small nod. "I've lived with stories that wouldn't leave me alone for a long time," he said. "Might be I'm the wrong kind of man to turn back now." By the time he slid behind the wheel again, daylight had faded to a dull smear behind thickening clouds. The first snowflakes tapped against the windscreen, soft at first, then steadier. As he eased the truck onto the highway and pointed it toward the dark wall of timber. Streetlights fell away behind them. Pines rose on both sides, closing in until the road felt like a tunnel. A hard gust shoved the old pickup sideways. Raven spread his paws on the dash to steady himself, nose working, amber eyes locked on the pale ribbon of road twisting into the mountains. "Whatever's waiting up there," Ryan murmured, fingers tightening on the wheel as the deed crinkled against his chest. "We face it together." Raven's tail thumped once, a quiet answer, while the last lights of town disappeared in the mirrors, and the wilderness swallowed them whole. Snow thickened with every mile as Ryan steered the pickup along the narrowing forest road, headlights carving two pale tunnels through the white. When the GPS gave up and went blank, a splintered wooden sign appeared at the roadside, buried in powder, Miller Ranch. He turned onto the rutted track, tires grinding over frozen mud. Beside him, Raven shifted his weight, nose pressed to the windscreen, breath fogging the glass. The 9-year-old German Shepherd's tail, tipped with silver, held a rigid line. It was not simple excitement. Ryan recognized the tight, coiled energy from convoys rolling toward bad valleys overseas. The trees opened onto a clearing, and the cabin emerged from the storm. The 1901 log structure hunched at the far edge, as if trying to sink back into the timber. The porch leaned, roof shingles gaped, and the chimney listed to one side. Ryan cut the engine. Silence rushed in, carried on a wind that scraped along the siding and rattled the loose porch rail. He sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel, feeling the ache in his knee and the prickle of adrenaline. He had walked into many buildings that felt wrong, safe houses, mud compounds, apartments that might be wired. But this plain rectangle of logs carried a different pressure. "Home," he said under his breath. Raven made a low sound that was not quite a growl. The dog was not watching the door. His amber eyes had locked on the stone chimney along the outer wall, thick rocks mortared together in uneven courses. "Do you smell something?" Ryan asked. "Coyotes? Bear?" Raven did not blink. They stepped out into the bite of the air. Snow crunched under Ryan's boots while Raven leapt to the ground, nostrils flaring. Every hair along the shepherd's spine stood up in a dark ridge. He did not wander the yard. He went straight to the steps, paws hitting each worn board like he was running a drill. By the time Ryan reached the porch, Raven was already waiting at the door, body tense, head slightly lowered. The key turned with reluctant resistance, metal grinding against metal that had not moved in years. The door stuck, then gave with a wooden groan. Cold, stale air washed out over them, carrying dust, old smoke, and a faint odor of damp paper. Ryan clicked his flashlight on, the narrow beam cutting through the dim main room. Everything looked as if someone had stepped away for a moment and then never returned. A heavy table sat beneath the front window, its surface covered in gray powder except for a clean ring, where a ceramic mug waited, coffee frozen in time as a dried brown line along the rim. Nearby, an open notebook lay face down. Pages yellowed, pen resting where it had fallen from a hand that never came back to finish the sentence. On the wall hung a canvas field coat and a knit cap. Beneath them, work boots stood side by side, laces still tied. Nathan Brooks might have walked out the door yesterday. Ryan's chest tightened. He had seen rooms like this under different skies, kitchens where radios still crackled beside half-eaten meals, doorways with shoes lined up for people who would never slip them on again. Raven slipped past him, moving as if he already knew where he was going. He didn't pause at the table or sniff the boots. The dog cut a clean line through the dust toward the far wall, where the massive stone fireplace dominated the room. Built from river rock and fieldstone, blackened by decades of use, it took up nearly an entire side of the cabin. The hearthstone at its base, a single broad slab, jutted out just far enough to serve as a bench. The shepherd stopped dead in front of it. His body lowered slightly, shoulders rolling forward, tail straight. He sniffed along the thin crack where the stone met the floorboards, pausing at one corner. A soft whine slipped out, thin but insistent. His paw came up and scratched once at the edge. Then again, claws ticking against rock. "Easy, boy," Ryan said. "We'll get settled in a minute." Raven ignored him. The scratches grew quicker and more focused. His eyes burnt into the stone, unblinking. It was not nervous pacing or random curiosity. It was that same locked-in stillness Ryan had seen once on a dirt road in Helmand Province, 2011, when the dog had sat hard and refused to move a single step farther. That day, the air had smelt of hot sand and diesel. Soldiers had grumbled about shortened patrols and going back to base early. Then engineers dug where Raven stared and found a pressure plate buried just deep enough to swallow 3 vehicles and their crews. The memory arrived with unwelcome clarity. The smell of explosives, the tremor in the ground when the disarmed charge went off, and the way Raven had leaned into Ryan's leg afterward like nothing unusual had happened. Now, the same dog pressed his paw against an old hearthstone in a forgotten cabin and told him, in the only language he knew, that something here did not belong. Ryan knelt beside him, ignoring the protest in his knee. The stone felt rough and bitterly cold under his fingertips. Beneath the dust, he found a thin line of hardened sealant where the edge met the floor, thicker at certain points, as if someone had once tried to close every gap. The floorboards in front of the fireplace looked slightly newer than the rest, with shinier nails and a different grain. Someone had torn up part of this room and put it back again. "You're really stuck on this, huh?" he murmured. Raven's ears flicked at his voice, but the dog did not look away. Another soft whine vibrated in his chest. He shifted closer until his shoulder bumped Ryan's arm, warm and solid. In every motel room and hospital corridor, that weight had anchored Ryan when pills and breathing exercises failed. In Helmand, that same steady presence had stood between him and pieces of steel meant to tear him apart. If a human had insisted this hard, he might have argued. With Raven, argument felt like tempting fate. If you've ever trusted a dog with your life, hit the like button. This bond is about to be tested like never before. The words sounded strange in the quiet room, yet speaking them snapped his thoughts into a line. This was not just a creepy legend. This was his partner telling him the ground under their feet held a story bigger than rumors. Ryan swept the flashlight around once more. No fresh tracks, no modern trash, no sign that anyone but the wind had visited in years. Only that frozen moment by the door, that abandoned mug, and a fireplace that suddenly felt less like warmth and more like a sealed door. He looked down at Raven. "All right," he said quietly. "We start with the stone." The dog's tail thumped once against the floor as the storm outside pressed colder fingers against the cabin walls. And the hearth between them waited, silent and heavy, for its secret to finally be disturbed. Snow still clung to the fence posts long after the last patrol truck disappeared down the Vermont road, leaving Jackson alone with the soft jingle of Shadow's tags and the slow creak of the farmhouse porch. For most of his life, he had been certain that being alone was the only honest way to live. Solitude was neat and controllable. There was no one to disappoint and no one to lose. Steel yourself, build walls, keep moving. That was the code that carried him through deserts, streets, and sleepless years, long after the uniforms were hung away. Then, Emily had walked into that frozen barn with a clipboard. A nervous smile and more stubborn grace than sense, and everything started to change. She saw past the short answers and the scars he tried to hide under flannel sleeves. She saw the way Shadow watched him, always half a step closer on bad days, and she understood without asking that the dog was more than a pet. Shadow was the reason Jackson's heart still beat at 3 a.m. when old echoes tried to convince him it should stop. It was Emily who insisted the abandoned training fields could become something better than an overgrown memory. It was her idea to turn a broken-down property into a sanctuary, where rescue dogs and bruised people could learn to trust their own feet again. Jackson had called it unrealistic. Shadow had trotted after Emily like he disagreed. Months later, as the first group of veterans and survivors fed anxious dogs in that drafty barn, Jackson realized the impossible had already started. During that brutal winter when ice crawled across windows and the wind hunted every crack in the siding, Jackson learnt truths he never expected. He discovered that handing a leash to a trembling teenager and watching a shy hound lean into her shaking palm did more for his nightmares than any pill. He saw a former medic who had sworn off attachments after losing too many patients fall asleep on a hay bale with a senior dog snoring against his chest. He heard Emily's voice move from careful to confident as she explained to new arrivals that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to show up anyway. Through it all, Shadow moved like a quiet guardian. The big shepherd padded from stall to stall, checking each newcomer with a sniff and a steady look. somehow knowing exactly who needed a nose pressed into their palm and who needed a respectful distance. When storms painted the sky an ugly gray and the power lines shook, Shadow curled at the center of the barn, heartbeat slow and steady, a living anchor for every anxious gaze. If someone woke screaming on a cot, it was usually Shadow who reached them first, pressing his weight against their side until breathing slowed and the room came back into focus. One night, after a session that cracked open more memories than anyone expected, Jackson found Emily standing alone by the paddock fence. Snowflakes caught in her hair, eyes bright with unshed tears. She whispered that she was terrified of failing the very people she wanted to help. Jackson, who had built a career on never admitting fear, surprised himself by telling her the truth. He was afraid every day. He feared losing another team, another home, another reason to try. Yet there they were, still breathing in the cold, still building something together in spite of shaking hands. We walk believing solitude builds strength. But as Jackson and Shadow prove, courage blooms in opening hearts. Love thaws any winter. If this tale of redemption moved you, honor protectors like Emily and Shadow. Subscribe, share with a friend, and leave thoughts below. Join for more unbreakable bonds. The next adventure awaits on screen now. By staying until this moment, you did more than watch images pass across a screen. You stood beside a man who thought he was finished, beside a woman who refused to give up on him, beside a dog who never once looked away when things grew dark. Maybe you recognized someone you know in Jackson's stiff shoulders or Emily's determined kindness. Maybe you saw a bit of your own reflection in the way they kept showing up, even when their voices trembled. If you have ever sat awake at midnight, wondering if you were better off pulling away from everyone, remember what happened in that little barn when people and dogs dared to lean toward each other instead of turning aside. Remember how Shadow planted his paws when panic crept back into the room, and how Jackson finally let another person's hand rest over the old scars on his forearm. Remember that love did not arrive as a grand speech or a perfect day. It came as small choices, one more visit, one more deep breath, one more chance offered to a creature that others had written off. Right now, somewhere off-screen, there is another person standing at the edge of their own winter, convinced that isolation is safer than risking connection. There is another exhausted protector like Emily, pouring from an almost empty cup. There is another four-legged guardian like Shadow waiting in a shelter kennel, watching every passing face, hoping someone will notice the light still shining behind tired eyes. When you share stories like this, you help them find each other. You become part of the bridge between lonely rooms and warm barns, between locked hearts and second chances. So if you know a friend, a parent, a neighbor, a fellow veteran or survivor who carries more than they admit, send this story to them. Let them hear the crunch of snow under Jackson's boots, feel the press of Shadow's fur against a shaking hand, and see the way Emily's smile returns when a frightened dog finally wags its tail. Let them know they are not strange for feeling broken, and they are not weak for wanting help. Remind them that healing often looks like muddy paws on clean floors and coffee shared in drafty kitchens while the wind howls outside. And if you are that person yourself, sitting alone with your own ghosts while this video plays in your hands, consider this a quiet invitation. Look into the eyes of a dog, hug the person who has not given up on you, or be that person for someone else. Take one step toward connection, however small, before the night ends. Shadows lose power when they are named and faced together. Thank you for walking this path with Jackson, Emily, and Shadow. Your time, your attention, and your compassion matter more than you know. Tap subscribe so you won't miss the next story of loyalty and grace. Hit the like button if you believe even the coldest season can hold the beginning of a new spring. Drop a comment sharing where you are watching from and who your shadow is. The friend, partner, or animal who stood guard over your hardest days. Keep this community growing because every name in the comments is another light against the dark. When this video ends, another chapter begins. On your screen, another unlikely hero is already waiting. The storm rolled in heavy, turning the clearing into a white bowl where wind screamed against the old logs. Ryan had just fed the fire when Raven's head snapped toward the door, ears pricked, muscles tight. 3 hard knocks followed, rattling the frame. County Sheriff's Office, a man called, voice too bright for a night like this. Just checking on our new landowner. Raven stepped in front of Ryan, body angled between him and the door. He didn't bark, he just stared, a low vibration in his chest that said, "Danger," in a way no word could. Ryan nudged the journals and ammo box deeper under the cot with his boot, the duffel sagging over them. Only when they were hidden did he flip the deadbolt and open the door a narrow span. Wind shoved cold into his face. On the porch stood a thick-set man in a dark parka with the county stars stitched to the sleeve. Ice crusted his hat brim and mustache. The badge he flashed caught the lamplight. "Harlan Graves," he said. "Sheriff, you Caldwell?" Ryan nodded. "That's me. Storm's nasty. You out checking every cabin?" Graves smiled like they were old friends. "Small county. We keep tabs on newcomers, especially ones who buy cursed ground. Mind if I step inside? Don't worry. I've survived worse than a little cold." "I'd rather keep the heat," Ryan answered. "We can talk here." For a moment the sheriff's eyes cooled, then the easy expression returned. He planted a boot against the threshold, tilting his head to look past Ryan. Table, cot, fireplace. His gaze skimmed in quick, practiced strokes, hitching briefly on the massive stone hearth before sliding away. Raven moved up beside Ryan's leg, big head level with his hip, amber eyes locked on Graves. "Fine-looking dog," Graves remarked. "Military?" "Something like that," Ryan said. "He doesn't take to strangers much." "Can't fault him." The sheriff let his gloved hands hang loose. "You picked a rough piece of ground for a fresh start, Mr. Caldwell. Not many bidders in that courthouse wanted Miller Ranch. Guess you don't spook easily." "Price was right," Ryan replied. $500 for history," Graves mused. "The last man who called this place home thought he was going to clean up the valley. Nathan Brooks, newspaper hero. Always talking about poison in the water, evil corporations, and crooked officials. You know the type." "I read some of his work," Ryan said evenly. "Didn't sound crazy to me." "That's the trouble," Graves answered softly. "Stories like his make decent folks doubt the men keeping the lights on. Black Ridge Mining brings jobs, taxes, and charity drives. Without them, half this county would be gone." Brooks whipped people up and then walked off. Maybe he ran, maybe he didn't. Either way, things got quieter. "I didn't come here to stir anything," Ryan said. "Just want quiet, fix the place. Mind my business." Graves tilted his head. "Depends what you call your business. Some folks get up here and start digging. Old wells, old records, old stories. That makes my job harder." Raven's tail twitched once, restrained. The sheriff nodded toward the chimney. "Have you put that fireplace to use yet?" "A few times," Ryan said. "Good, keep it that way." Graves's smile sharpened. "Nothing steadies a man in a storm like a working hearth. Nothing causes more trouble than prying into what's under old stone. You catch my meaning?" The words were casual, the warning wasn't. "I'm not in the habit of tearing up other men's houses," he said. "Glad to hear it." Graves straightened. "Out here, we like our ghosts staying where they belong. If you hear noises or see lights on the ridge, you ignore them. Call me before you call anyone from out of county. We deal with our own." "You drove a long way to tell me not to dig," Ryan said quietly. "Maybe I care about public safety," the sheriff replied. "Blizzards swallow people. Slopes give out. Old shafts collapse. Best not to test how much weight the ground can take." His gaze flicked again to Raven. "That dog looks like he knows when something's about to blow. Listen to him. He might keep you from stepping somewhere you shouldn't." "Always have," Ryan said. Graves tipped his hat. "Welcome to Flathead County. You behave and we'll get along fine." He turned and tromped down the steps, swallowed by blowing snow. Ryan listened for an engine and thought he heard a faint door slam somewhere down the buried track, then nothing but wind. He shut the door and slid the deadbolt home. Raven paced once between hearth and entrance, then sat squarely in front of him, searching his face. "He didn't come to check on my health," Ryan murmured, hand resting on the dog's neck. They stayed near the fire through the night. Each creak of timber sounded like a boot on boards, each gust like a truck pulling up outside. The sheriff's words threaded through Ryan's dreams, tangled with the memory of the journals and the final lines Nathan Brooks had written back then. Gray light seeped through frosted glass when he woke. The storm had blown itself into a heavy stillness. Ryan pulled on his coat and opened the door. Snow lay deep across the clearing, swallowing every trace of yesterday. "Come on, boy," he said. "Let's see what the damage is." Raven bounded ahead, leaping through drifts. The pickup sat near the tree line. Ryan brushed snow from the windscreen and hood. As he rounded the front fender, his foot slid on something slick where powder met rubber. He grabbed the bumper, steadied himself, then looked down. The sidewall bore a single, perfect slice, a clean cut no wider than a knife blade, long enough to bleed the air slowly while he slept. He circled the truck. Every tire carried the same wound, identical strokes of steel and black rubber. Raven's hackles rose. The shepherd lowered his nose, tracing for scent, but fresh snow had eaten almost everything. He followed a faint line a few yards toward the trees, then stopped, frustration in the low sound in his throat. Ryan straightened, scanning the quiet timber and the buried road. No engines, no voices, no sign of anyone watching, though he felt the weight of unseen eyes from somewhere beyond the drifted track. He didn't need to see faces. 4 slashed tires, after a sheriff's visit wrapped in talk about ghosts and digging, said more than any speech. "Message received," he said under his breath. Raven pressed against his leg, solid and warm in the cutting air, eyes still locked on the route Graves had taken. Ryan rested his palm on the dog's back, feeling the steady rise and fall. "They want us stuck," he murmured. "Means we're closer to something than they like." The wind picked up again, whispering through the pines. Above the buried truck, the chimney stood like a stone sentry against the white sky. Somewhere under that hearth lay the reason a journalist vanished, and a sheriff carved warnings into rubber. Ryan turned back toward the cabin, Raven pacing at his side, both of them aware that the game in this valley had just changed. Snow came sideways that night, out of nowhere, a white wall hammering the old cabin so hard the logs shuddered with every gust. The world beyond the windows was gone, replaced by swirling noise and shifting shadows that erased the line between storm and sky. Ryan had stacked wood beside the hearth and journals wrapped in plastic and tucked inside the ammo box under the cot. He sat on the edge of the bed cleaning his rifle by lantern light while Raven dozed near the door, chin on his paws, one ear tilted toward the night. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the only sounds were the soft crackle of burning logs and the occasional pop when sap boiled in the fire. Ryan finished reassembling the rifle, checked the action, and laid it within arm's reach against the wall. He had lived through enough long storms to know they created strange thoughts. Raven's eyes snapped open. The shepherd's head lifted, ears fully erect, nose cutting the air. The change in him was so sudden that Ryan's muscles tightened before his mind caught up. The dog stared at the door, then at the far wall, as if sound traveled through the logs from both directions at once. Under the wind, Ryan heard something else, a faint crunch, then another, irregular and careful. Not branches, not falling snow. Boots. He turned the lantern wick down until the room dimmed to a low glow. The fire became a dull orange mass in the hearth, throwing long shadows. Raven rose without a sound, weight shifting forward, fur along his spine rising in a slow wave. He moved to stand slightly in front of Ryan, body angled toward the door, head low, eyes burning. "Where?" Ryan whispered. The dog glanced toward the rear window, then back to the door. 2 points, 2 directions, more than one person. A soft rattle touched the glass in the back room, then stopped. A heartbeat later, a board near the front porch complained under weight. Ryan's mind mapped the approach automatically. One man testing the side, one at the front. Maybe more, waiting beyond the lantern's reach. They had cut his tires, sent the sheriff with friendly threats, and now the storm had given them cover thick enough to swallow gunshots. Ryan took the rifle, moved to the corner where wall met stone, and crouched. Raven shifted to his side, every line of his body screaming focus. The knocking did not come. Instead, metal whispered in a lock at the back door, subtle and patient. The back latch had been stiff since he arrived. Whoever worked it cursed under his breath. Words lost against the wind, then tried again. The click, when it finally gave, sounded incredibly loud. The door eased inward. A strip of white from the storm sliced into the back room, carrying snow and cold and the dark outline of a figure slipping across the threshold. Raven launched. He exploded from Ryan's side, claws tearing at the floorboards as he drove through the doorway like a fired round. There was a shout, a crash, and the thud of bodies slamming into old furniture. The lantern's glow caught a flash of steel in the intruder's hand before Raven hit him full in the chest. They went down together, the chair splintering under the impact. The knife skittered across the floor, spinning away. Ryan moved, rifle to his shoulder, breath controlled. Another shape filled the front window for a fraction of a second, then dropped below the sill. He fired once, high, the round shattering the glass and spraying shards into the blizzard. "The next one that comes through that door catches the real thing," he shouted, voice hard, words cutting through storm and panic. "You picked the wrong cabin." On the floor, Raven held the first man pinned, teeth clamped in the padded sleeve of his jacket, growl vibrating through the room. The intruder's free hand clawed for something at his belt until Ryan stepped in and drove the rifle butt into his wrist. The object clattered away, followed by a mumbled curse and a sharp cry. Through the torn mask, Ryan saw only wide eyes, young and angry. "Call him off," a voice yelled from outside. Male, older, carrying authority that chilled more than the air. "You don't want this to go bad, Caldwell." "It already is," Ryan called back. He kept his barrel trained on the pinned man's chest. "You want him breathing? You back off my land, now." For a few seconds, the storm filled the silence between them. Then another voice, closer to the front, spoke through gritted teeth. "We're not leaving, not for good. You can scare a couple boys tonight, but the snow won't last forever. You know what we want. Hand it over and walk away while you still can." Raven yanked his head, shaking the man's arm until he cried out again. Ryan's pulse pounded, but his hand stayed steady. "All I got here is rotten lumber and old ghosts," he answered. "If you're willing to die for either, step inside." A harsh laugh. Footsteps crunched beyond the warped porch. The silhouette at the shattered window rose part way, then ducked again when Ryan shifted his aim. Snow swirled through the broken glass, dusting the floor. "Not tonight," the older voice decided. "Storm's doing enough damage without bodies to dig out in the spring. Let the hero have his little victory. But listen close, soldier. This hill doesn't hold secrets without help. That dog can't watch every direction at once. Sleep light." Boots retreated, fading under the storm's noise. A distant engine coughed to life, then grew weaker as it crawled down the buried track. When the last vibration faded from the floor, Ryan exhaled slowly. "Easy," he told Raven. The dog released the intruder's sleeve on command, but stayed planted across his chest. Ryan kicked the knife and dropped the weapon farther away, then jerked his chin toward the open doorway. "You've got one chance to walk out of here in one piece. You tell your boss this place isn't empty anymore. Next time you come through my door, you come to answer for what's under that hearth." The man scrambled up, clutching his arm, and back toward the night, too rattled to look brave. He disappeared into the white, swallowed almost instantly. Ryan shut and barred both doors, then stuffed blankets and boards over the broken window to slow the cold. When the room held a thin barrier between their heat and the blizzard, he finally sank onto the cot. Raven stayed pressed against his leg, eyes still on the door. Moments like this prove dogs choose us for a reason. Subscribe so we never stop telling their stories. Without Raven's warning, that knife might have found his ribs in the dark. Without the dog, those men would think this cabin was just another box waiting to burn. Storm or no storm, he was not alone on this hill. Outside, the wind screamed over the roof and erased every footprint, but the promise the attackers had left behind clung heavier than the snow. They would return. When they did, he and Raven would be ready. Ryan waited until the last echo of the intruder's engine dissolved into the timber before he let himself breathe. The cabin still hummed with the storm, yet the silence felt worse than gunfire. He hauled the ammo box and journals onto the table, pages already smudged from hours of reading. Test results, photos of deformed livestock, maps of hidden pipes, billing records, and a list of deputies who had signed off on clean inspections that were anything but. Black Ridge Mining had turned the valley into a chemical drain and paid local law to look away. Raven lay by the hearth, head up, eyes following every move. When Ryan closed the last journal, the shepherd rose and pushed his nose against Ryan's wrist, a quiet reminder that sitting here waiting for another knock was not survival. It was hoping the enemy would be kind. "You're right," Ryan said. "Time to move first." He spread a folded map beside the lamp, tracing the narrow road from Miller Ranch to Kalispell. The forecast he had seen in town floated back. Whiteout bands, road closures, and plows pulled off certain routes after midnight. Driving now meant gambling with ditches and downed trees. Staying meant giving graves a clear target. Somewhere between the sealed hearth and tonight's break-in, the sheriff had realized exactly what Ryan had unearthed. Keeping it all in this cabin was no longer an option. Ryan slid his battered laptop into a dry bag, copied the scans and photos to a flash drive, then sealed the journals in a plastic-wrapped bundle. He threw blankets, flares, and a first aid kit behind the truck seat. Last came Raven's harness. The click of the buckle steadied his pulse more than any deep-breathing exercise ever had. "Short run, buddy," he murmured. Down the hill and back before dawn. The door fought him, swollen with cold. When it opened, wind slammed into his chest, carrying needles of snow. The truck looked half-buried already. He cranked the engine until it coughed awake and let the heater wheeze to life. Headlights punched shallow cones into the swirling dark, barely reaching the tree line. The track to the county road had vanished, replaced by uneven white mounds. He shifted into four-wheel drive and eased forward, letting muscle memory feel for the slight dip that marked the original ruts. Raven braced himself with one paw on the dash, weight low, gaze locked ahead. Several times the pickup slid sideways, tires spinning on packed ice. Ryan corrected gently, mind flashing back to convoys creeping along unmarked Afghan roads where one wrong turn ended in fire. Compared to that, this was only freezing water and gravity. They crawled past the buried mailbox, then a stand of dark pines that meant the county road lay just ahead. The storm swallowed every landmark, yet small details remained. The faint rise of a culvert, the shift in wind when the trees thinned. Eventually, dim orange halos appeared through the white streetlights, marking the outskirts of Kalispell. The town felt ghostly. Snow muffled engines and footsteps alike. A few plows lumbered down side streets, orange beacons spinning slowly. Shop fronts glowed behind drawn shades. Ryan followed the main drag until the square brick outline of the public library emerged at the corner, its sign half hidden under drifting snow. He parked near the side entrance, facing the street. No cruisers nearby, no idling trucks with lights off. Raven climbed into the driver's seat as Ryan opened the door, nose nearly touching the glass, waiting for a cue. "Watch the lot," Ryan said. "One bark if anyone gets clever." Inside, the air felt almost tropical after the cold. The place smelt of paper, printer ink, and lemon cleaner. Most lights were dimmed. A handful of computers blinked in sleep mode. At the front desk, a young woman in a puffy vest and thick scarf looked up from her phone, surprised to see anyone tracking snow across the entry mat. "We're closing early if the grid flickers," she said. "Storm warning just hit my phone again. Are you lost or determined?" "Determined," Ryan answered. "Won't be long, just need a signal." She gestured toward the bank of machines. "Pick any, Wi-Fi's still working as far as I know. If everything goes dark, I'll holler." He chose a terminal with a clear view of the parking lot and set his own laptop down, using the library station's power but not its network. Old habits refused to die. He tethered through his phone instead, routing traffic through an encrypted tunnel Jacob Ortiz had insisted they set up years ago, in case life ever gets stupid. Jacob had been his radio man in Fallujah, and now chased politicians and corporations with the same persistence he once used on garbled transmissions. Ryan compressed the files. High-resolution scans of every page. Photographs of the lifted hearthstone, the hollow beneath, the metal box, the leather journals, the IDs, the test charts, and even a shot of Graves' cruiser parked just beyond the clearing on the sheriff's friendly visit. Another folder held a video from his phone. Raven clawing at the sealed stone, his own hands prying it up. The first glimpse of evidence that had cost Nathan Brooks his life. He stared at the email window for a moment, feeling the weight of what he was about to release. Up until now, everything lived in his truck, his head, and a dead reporter's handwriting. Once this left the valley, Black Ridge's secrets belonged to more than a handful of men willing to kill over them. He began to type. Jake. Black Ridge is worse than the rumors. Attached, dumping records, fake lab results, missing person cover. Local deputies on the take. All of it came out of a cache under Nathan Brooks's hearthstone. I'm staying in his cabin. Graves knows I've been digging. Tires cut, armed visit, break-in during a whiteout. They won't stop. You always said, if I ever stumbled into a story, I should bring it to you first. Consider this the flare. If I don't call by 0600 Mountain, send everything to the FBI, EPA, and any editor you trust that doesn't drink from mining money. Do not drive up here alone. Ryan. He read the message once. No drama, no war stories, just enough context for his friend to understand the stakes and the clock. Then he attached the final folder and hit send. A thin progress bar crept across the screen while the storm pounded the high windows. For one long second the connection hung at 99%, his reflection hovering over the frozen image of Raven and the open hearth. Then the bar slipped to complete, and the confirmation icon appeared. Ryan set a countdown on his watch for 6 in the morning. The digits glowed like a silent order. Survive long enough to make that call, or trust Jacob to do the rest. The failsafe no commander had asked for now existed anyway. On his way past the desk, the clerk called. "Sir, they just upgraded the alert. 0 visibility till after sunrise. We've got cots downstairs if you want to write it out here." "Thanks," he said. "Can't. Someone's waiting on me." "Hope they're worth it," she replied. "They are," he answered, thinking of a black dog staring at a stone slab in a lonely cabin. Snow bit his face the instant he stepped outside again. The truck waited under a fresh crust, windows clouded. Through the frost, he could see Raven's silhouette in the driver's seat, ears forward, gaze fixed on the entrance as if he had counted every minute of the separation. Ryan climbed behind the wheel and checked his watch. Hours, minutes, and seconds ticked down in steady rhythm. He looked at Raven and spoke the line he had just written, making it real with his voice. "If I don't call, send everything to the FBI." The dog's tail thumped once, solid reassurance in a world that felt like it was sliding sideways. Ryan put the truck in gear and turned back toward the invisible road, climbing into the dark hills, carrying with him a deadline, a partner, and the knowledge that the truth was no longer trapped under stone. At 3 in the morning, the world around Miller Ranch felt brittle and hollow. Ryan lay on top of the blankets, boots by the cot, rifle within reach. Raven slept by the door with his nose almost touching the crack beneath it. Raven woke first. One moment he was limp on the floorboards, the next he was upright, muscles tight, ears aimed at the night, his nose wrinkled, pulling in air from the gap under the door. A chemical reek slid in with the wind. Gasoline. Outside, boots moved in a slow circle, crunching snow, stopping at the walls. Glass tinkled near the kitchen. Flame chased it a heartbeat later, crawling up the wall. Ryan was already moving. He grabbed the ammo box and shoved it under the hearth where stone met packed earth, then slid the journals in after it, wedging the metal until it jammed. Fire could chew through beams in minutes. Stone and dirt might buy hours. "With me," he told Raven, dragging on his coat and wrapping a damp cloth over his mouth. The dog gave one deep bark, then pressed against his leg. Smoke rolled down from the rafters. The back door frame glowed faintly at the edges, yet the handle stayed dark. Ryan dropped his shoulder and kicked it open. They burst straight into 40-degree wind that hit like knives. Behind them, the cabin burnt hard, flames clawing at the logs, sparks spinning into the white sky. In front of them, 4 men stood across the clearing, weapons raised, trucks idling behind with headlights cutting tunnels through the storm. One man stood half a step ahead of the others in a heavy coat, posture loose and practiced. Ryan recognized the voice when he spoke. It matched the smile that had filled his doorway days earlier. You should have listened when the sheriff told you to stop digging, the leader called. Now the cabin goes up, the evidence goes with it, and you vanish in the snow like Brooks. Ryan edged sideways, keeping the burning building between himself and two of the rifles. Raven moved with him, body angled, teeth bared just enough to show he was past warnings. You already tried quiet, Ryan said. Tires, night raids, friendly chats. This is you panicking. The leader lifted his pistol. What I am is done waiting, he replied. Towns like this survive because men like me decide what gets buried. You brought in outsiders. So now we close the book on you. Wind roared around them, feeding the fire until heat scorched the back of Ryan's neck. Under that roar, another sound began, faint at first, rising into a steady chop that made the snow vibrate. The leader's eyes flicked upward. One of his men swore. 2 helicopters dropped out of the low cloud, rotors beating the storm flat. Searchlights snapped on, ripping open the dark. The clearing turned harsh, white and black. Trucks, gunmen, a burning cabin, Ryan's hunched shoulders, Raven's braced body. Everything froze under twin cones of light. This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation, working with the Montana State Police. A voice boomed through a loudspeaker. Drop your weapons and lie face down now. You are surrounded. Rotor wash slammed into the clearing, hurling sparks sideways. Snow whipped into spinning sheets. Under that hammering noise, the leader's pistol sagged. Red dots from rifles painted his chest. One of his men flung his weapon into the drift and dropped to his knees with his hands high. The others followed as agents in heavy jackets poured out of the timber, and troopers pushed up the buried track. On Ryan's wrist, the watch read 06 SARS exactly. Raven barked once, sharp and almost triumphant. Between 2 federal officers stumbled Sheriff Harlan Graves, wrists cuffed behind his back. You think this changes what runs this place? He shouted when he saw Ryan. Companies like Black Ridge pay fines and keep going. Towns need them. All you did was burn your own roof. You covered up poison and murder, Ryan said, rifle lowered but ready, Raven still pressed to his leg. Whatever Black Ridge does next, your part ends here. By sunrise, the cabin had fallen into a steaming shell. Fire crews drowned the last hot spots while investigators photographed everything. When the chimney cooled, they pried the cracked hearthstone aside and dug through scorched soil beneath. The ammo box came out blackened, handle warped, yet seal intact. Inside, the leather journals and copied records had browned edges but clear words. No one called the place haunted anymore, they called it evidence. In the months that followed, Black Ridge mining executives traded suits for handcuffs as warrants landed. Records from the hearth cache and seized servers showed years of illegal dumping. Wells were cleaned and tested until the valley's water was declared safe again. Nathan Brooks's work finally reached the front page. His name was read out in court while photos of the cabin hearth glowed on a screen. Sheriff Graves heard his sentence in the same courthouse where he had once joked with jurors, leaving in cuffs instead of a badge. A year after the fire, summer lay soft over Miller Ranch. The charred foundation was gone, replaced by new beams and straight walls. Ryan had rebuilt with neighbors who now drove up the hill to help instead of whispering about curses. The new chimney rose square and solid from fresh stone. There was no hollow behind it, no hidden box under it, only clean masonry. Raven moved slower now. Silver fur dusted his muzzle, yet his eyes remained sharp. He patrolled the porch each morning, then chose his spot facing the clearing. When the last shingle settled and tools went back into the truck, he lay down there with a sigh that sounded like approval. Inside, the fireplace held a single broad hearthstone Ryan had hauled up from the creek himself. A mason in town had carved a line across its face, the letters deep. For Nathan Brooks, we finished what you started. When Ryan set it in place and wiped the mortar from its edges, the room felt less like a shelter and more like a promise. On the first evening, he lit a fire there, flames caught on fresh pine, throwing soft light over clean walls. Ryan carried a mug of coffee to the porch and sat on the top step. Air cooled as the sun slid toward the ridge. Down in the valley, the creek ran clear. Raven stretched out beside him, gray-faced, head against his boot, gaze fixed on the sunset over the darkening timber. Ryan looked through the open doorway at the engraved stone, then out over the land. Smoke rose from the chimney in a straight line. "We got there in the end," he murmured. "You, me, and a reporter who refused to let this place stay quiet." Raven's tail thumped once against the boards. Night settled over the rebuilt ranch, quiet and clean. Beneath the new hearth there was no box, no stain, only solid earth. Above it, a veteran and his old dog shared the last light of the day, keeping watch over a valley that finally had a chance to heal. This is a documented, true story, even if the names and a few small details have been changed to protect the people who lived it. Somewhere in the northern mountains, a cabin once stood over a buried secret. A black dog once clawed at cold stone until someone finally listened, and a tired veteran chose to believe his partner's warning instead of the comfortable lie everyone around him accepted. Paperwork, court records, water tests, and arrest summaries now live in quiet government folders, but the part that matters most will never fit inside a file. What it took for one man and one dog to stand together when powerful people decided the truth should stay underground forever. Sometimes the home we are searching for is not lumber, walls, a mortgage, or a clean deed. Sometimes it is the living bond that refuses to break when the wind howls and the lights go out. Ryan walked into Miller Ranch carrying combat scars, nightmares, and the belief that isolation would keep him safe. Raven walked beside him carrying old training, buried instincts, and the stubborn loyalty only a working dog can give. The cabin was only a shape in the snow. The real shelter formed in the space between a human hand and a warm muzzle, between a hoarse voice and the steady heartbeat pressed against his leg when memories roared louder than the storm. Maybe, as you watched their journey unfold, you thought about your own version of a haunted cabin. It might be a childhood house where the air still feels heavy, a job that poisons your spirit a little more every week, a secret in your family nobody wants to name, or a memory you keep pushing deeper instead of lifting into the light. It could also be the quiet apartment where you tell yourself you do not need anyone, even while the silence keeps getting louder. Everybody carries hidden rooms, sealed trapdoors, places we walk around carefully so we do not disturb what hurts. If Ryan and Raven's fight for the valley's water, for Nathan Brooks's unfinished work, and for their own piece of peace moved you even a little, let this moment be more than the end of a video. Let it be the start of something small and brave in your own life. Because what saved that town was not a perfect hero or a flawless plan. It was a man willing to say, "I am scared, but this is wrong," and a dog who would not stop scratching at the place where truth was buried. So do 3 things right now while the story is still warm in your chest and the images have not faded. First, honor the bond. If there is an animal in your life that has stood guard over your hardest days, take a minute today to look into their eyes. Speak their name with gratitude and give them the kindness they never stop giving you. If you have always wanted that kind of companion, consider visiting a shelter or rescue in your area when you can, because somewhere a dog with tired eyes is waiting to choose you the way Raven chose Ryan. Second, refuse to look away from injustice, even when it feels far away or too big. You may not be uncovering illegal dumping or confronting corrupt officials in a snowstorm, But you do see things in your own world that are not right. A neighbor being ignored, a coworker being pushed around, a friend slipping deeper into silence. You never have to do everything, yet you can do something. Send the message, make the call, ask the hard question, and stand next to the person who feels alone. Small acts of courage ripple farther than you think, especially when they are grounded in real care. Third, help carry this story forward. The more people hear about ordinary courage, about guardians like Raven and stubborn souls like Ryan who choose truth over comfort, the harder it becomes for darkness to hide in plain sight. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next journey we share. Tap the like button if you believe loyalty still matters in a world that moves too fast. Share this video with one person who loves dogs, mountains, real-life mysteries, or simple proof that decency has not disappeared. Leave a comment telling us where you are watching from and who your Raven is. A pet, a partner, a relative, or a friend who stood by you when things were at their worst. This is a documented true story, but it is also a mirror. Somewhere out there, another veteran is staring at a door during a sleepless night. Another dog is pacing a small room because it senses a heart in trouble, and another whistleblower is wondering whether to speak. Maybe one of those people is you. When you close this window, remember what happened when a man listened to his dog, trusted his gut, and refused to let an old crime stay buried. Remember the cabin burning, the helicopters arriving at 6 on the dot, and the engraved stone that turned a cursed hearth into a promise. We finished what you started. Before you scroll away, pause for a quiet breath and notice how you feel. Maybe your shoulders dropped somewhere between the first knock on that cabin door and the moment the new hearthstone settled into place. Maybe you realized you have survived your own kind of winter. Every time someone watches a story like this all the way through, they help build a circle of people who care about courage, loyalty, and justice. That circle includes you now. Whether you are in a crowded city, a small town, or a silent room, you are sitting with us by that fire. Your voice in the comments, your choice to share, and your decision to return for the next chapter tell platforms and, more importantly, other hurting people that there is still an audience for real hope. So before autoplay drags you somewhere else, choose intentionally. Save this video if it reminded you of someone who once stood guard over your heart. Send it to the person who has answered your late-night calls. Tell us about the dog who pulled you back from the edge, or the moment when you decided to stop running from your own haunted cabin. We read what you write. We carry those words into the next script, the next investigation, the night spent editing so that you have something worth pressing play on when you come back again. Thank you for staying, for caring, for believing that what Ryan and Raven did on that frozen hill still matters.